And here in Africa, pro-civilian leaders in Sudan have called for mass protests amid rising tensions between those in charge of steering the country towards elections. The demonstrations have been called in response to a continuing sit-in stage since last week in front of the presidential palace in the capital, Khartoum, by an alliance of rebel groups and political entities. These groups used to be part of the Forces of Freedom and Change, a loose coalition that was at the helm of the month-long protest that led to the military removal of former President Omar al-Bashir in April 2019. Under an August 2019 power-sharing deal between the military and the FFC, the country has been run by a sovereign council of military and civilian members tasked with overseeing the transition until elections scheduled for 2023, as well as a council of ministers under civilian Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok. Editor of African Liberty, Ibrahim Anoba, joins me live now from Baltimore as we discuss the rising political tensions in Sudan. Good to have you join us, Ibrahim.
Thank you.
So as we stated in our introduction, there has been some kind of power-sharing deal in Sudan since 2019 when Omar al-Bashir was toppled. But now it seems like there is a three-way crisis for the military. There is crisis within the military ranks, there is crisis within the civilian ranks, and there's also crisis between the military and the civilians. What do you make of the situation?
I think what Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok said yesterday, that this is pretty much an existential threat to Sudan and the worst political crisis the country has gone to in the last few years, is actually a perfect description of the situation you have in Sudan. As you perfectly described, it's a three-way triangular problem here. First, you have the military against the FCC. Within the FCC, you have the FCC and the new FCC, the group calling itself the Charter Alliance. But also within the military, you have the military general Abdel Fattah al-Burhan dealing with remnants of former President al-Bashir loyalists, who of course staged the coup we saw 3 weeks ago. So it's pretty much a very dicey situation. The political crisis in Sudan is no way near resolved. In fact, the 2023 election is likely not going to happen, particularly because the civilian arm of the country that the military is trying to transition into is in itself very divided. So until that civilian coalition, the FCC, and of course the Charter Alliance, solve their differences, I do not think we can witness any political resolution to the crisis in Sudan.
So you've mentioned two key things. I want to start with, before you talked about the Abdallah Hamdok statement, but you also talked about the return to democratic rule. But I want to start with Abdallah Hamdok. He made a statement yesterday, which you referred to. But can he be exonerated from the crisis in Sudan?
Well, you have to remember that Mr. Hamdok is dealing with a situation where he always had the military watching over whatever he's doing. In fact, he pretty much cannot solitarily execute many of the economic plans he has for Sudan. Of course, we've seen him working with the IMF to bring about some economic reforms, but the military is pretty much dragging its feet when it comes to agreeing with Hamdok on numerous of his reforms. So if that is the case, I do not think it would be so fair for us to 100% criticize Hamdok as the sole culprit of this political crisis. You have to blame Abdel Fattah al-Burhan as well, and also the leaders of the many rebel groups that form this new so-called Charter Alliance.
Or the civilian arm of government that the military is supposed to hand over to also have infighting amongst their ranks. But when you look at the situation, there are civilians, there are citizens calling for military to take over during the protest. We heard all of those statements during the protest. But it also seems that the military seems to be holding on to power. Isn't that why one of the reasons why it might be difficult to return to democratic rule in 2023?
I mean, Precious, this is a really complex situation. I mean, take your mind back to 2019 when the hundreds of thousands of Sudanese fled to the streets of Khartoum, Omdurman, and elsewhere to demand that the military and Omar al-Bashir go out of power. And fast forward 2 years later, you are seeing the same people, maybe a fraction of them, calling for the military to throw out the civilian arm led by Doc. So I think this is pretty much a matter of frustration that hugely has to do with economic reasons than political. Remember, Sudan is pretty much very hard hit by COVID. The unemployment crisis in the country, or the rate is about 18%, and close to between 38 to 40% of the country's 41 million people are impoverished. So you can sense the frustration from the people stemming from all these economic problems. So when you have the military saying, well, we're pretty much not able to implement these policies because Amdok and his colleagues in the FCC and the new FCC, that is the Charter Alliance, are stalling this process because there's an infighting among them, then you have to blame the civilian, which of course is the reason why a lot of people are blaming the civilian and calling for the military to pretty much assume total control. But also the joker here is that we've seen, at least in the last few hours, a lot of people trooped to the street of Khartoum to counter-protest against the pro-military faction, saying this is exactly what they fought against with al-Bashir, that giving individuals like al-Bashir and now Abdel Fattah al-Burhan the pathway to dominate and assume 100% political control of the country is a dangerous threat that has to stop. And this, again, it just makes the already complex situation even more chaotic.
And if we are to be honest, transitioning from an authoritarian rule to a democratic rule is a very difficult one, and that's because of the toxic legacies and weak institutions that are left behind. Do you think that Sudan has the key requirements needed for a successful transition at this time?
I think the ingredients are there. It's just that greediness and political selfishness are coming into play here. But it will be kind of not fair to say these are the only reasons, particularly if you consider the fact that Sudan is an immensely pluralized society when it comes to ethnicity. It has a lot of ethnic divisions, and the so-called marginalization of these ethnic divisions in the last 30 years during Omar al-Bashir's reign is coming into play here. People are now saying, well, we're going to have a new government, but we have been marginalized for about 2 decades. So we want in on this government. And when you have all these groups from across the sub-regions of Darfur to Omdurman and elsewhere saying they want in on the FCC and eventually whatever transition is going to take place, then you have a problem of addressing ethnic or national interests. And bringing these different national or ethnic interests to make what should become the Sudanese interest. So the ingredients are there, the willingness is there. And remember, Sudan is a remarkably active country when it comes to political, demanding political rights and political activism. Today is pretty much the Remembrance Day for the 1964 revolution that threw out Ibrahim Anoba. And with the last 2 years, we've seen a rejuvenation of that 1964 spirit in ousting al-Bashir and, of course, today. So you can expect that the people will keep on being in the streets, demanding the best that they can get. So the ingredients are there. The people are active. There is a political will to do this. People are willing to come together. It's just the greed and finding a common ground that is the problem at this point.
And also at this point, there are lots of talks about African solutions to African problems. People believe that Africa should be left to find solutions to its economic and political crisis. But do you think that some sort of international interference is necessary at this point?
Absolutely not. The reason why Sudan is even here in the first place is because a lot of people have tried to tell Sudan what to do after the ouster of Omar al-Bashir. But I think the people of Sudan have to be the one to bring themselves out of this chaos. We cannot advocate for any foreign intervention or foreign dictatorship of what should go into Sudan. I do not even think the AU or whatever other sub-region in the Northern Africa, maybe the Arab League, should be here playing any decisive role. What needs to be done in Sudan is that the FCC, first of all, needs to fix its in-house problem. They need to talk to the Charter Alliance and listen to what they have to say. I mean, the reason for the Charter Alliance existing in the first place has to do with kind of a feeling of elite hegemony within the FCD itself. People are saying, oh, well, when there was the protest in 2019, not only did we have the elite, we had bakerymen, we had street hawkers, we had local clerics from the suburbs of Sudan coming out to protest. But now that you have the FCC, you're trying to sideline us by giving 100% of power to these political elites. So that problem within the FCC has to be addressed. So when the FCC has itself together, it can then come to Abdel Fattah Burhan to negotiate, because you cannot come to the negotiating table with the military in Africa when you are divided within yourself. It's just playing directly into the hands of Burhan. Of course, we've seen him say he wants to hold election in 2023, but you cannot really trust the military in Africa when it comes to promises. So this is why,
that's why I was going to before I let you go quickly. Do you think that, because there has been a call on the street for the military to take over, do you think that a military takeover is inevitable in Sudan? Because some weeks ago we saw a coup attempt in that country.
I would want to say it's inevitable, but my conscience wouldn't want to say that, because I do not want to see this happen again in Sudan. It's going to bring the country decades backward. They fought so hard in 2019 to bring about this change. You cannot allow the military to take power again. This is why I'm saying the FCC needs to get itself together. But going by what happened 3 weeks ago, the unsuccessful military coup, which it's so scary. You can imagine that if Burhan, for instance, bought into that military coup, it would have been successful. The reason why it failed was likely because Burhan pretty much quelled the fire of that, what do you call it, mutiny within the military itself. So what happens if Burhan just wake up tomorrow and say, well, I think this has gone too far. I think the military should 100% be in control. Nobody can say, oh, we are objecting. They can only go to the street to protest. So the FCC is at a pivotal point here to bring about civilian rule in Sudan.
And we will continue to monitor developments in that country. Thank you so much for talking to us, Ibrahim Anoba.
Always.
Let's take a break now. When the What Now returns, we'll have more updates.